Hello and welcome back to another episode with me, Matt Ryan, at Matt Ryan Photo. So today, I want to talk to you about a inexpensive yet quality camera. Right here. This is the Yashica MG-1. Now this is a rangefinder based camera, and if you're not familiar with what a rangefinder is, unlike SLRs where you're actually seeing through the lens and you're seeing exactly what the lens is seeing by using a prism with your viewfinder, this actually pretty much your viewfinder goes straight through to here. Is it better? Well, no, but it's not worse either. It's just different. It allows for fast capture. Most of the time, rangefinders are kind of designed to be used for street photography, you know, or like quick photography, stuff where you don't have to think too much about it. And this is no exception. Now, the Yashicas, like the Electro 35s, the MG1, and all the various other versions of the Yashicas, they're all touted as being kind of like a poor man's Leica. Now, I don't like that idea. I don't like that name. I don't like the terminology because I think it's almost insulting to the Yashica. And it is, really, because the Yashicas are actually a really good camera. The thing with it was that they were, back in the day, they were cheap. They were designed for the average everyday person to be able to afford a good camera. And rangefinders were very popular back then, back in the 60s and 70s and even the 80s. And they're even now, to this day, they're still very popular, but there really isn't a whole lot of options out there for an actual true rangefinder. You have the Leicas, you have the, probably even more popular than the Leica is the Fujis, like the Fuji X Pro series, the Fuji X100 series. Those are very popular, and they're a rangefinder based camera. This little guy here, and it's actually a little bit, I would say a little big for being a rangefinder. Maybe, I don't know, probably about average. It's kind of tall though. Anyway. This little guy here has a 45mm Yashinon f2.8. So its aperture is a 2.8, 45mm, which is just shy of the more common 50mm. So this Yashica, this is the MG1. It's very similar to what the Electro 35 GSNs and all their various different variations of that camera. Very similar, very similar in all aspects. However, my Electro 35 GSN, which you will see in a later video, has a 45mm 1.7. So it's a little bit better in lower light. Both of them have just crystal clear lenses. And that's kind of the beauty of these, is the lenses are just absolutely sharp. Very, very, very sharp lenses. And you can pick them up for hardly anything at all. I think this one goes for like 30 bucks. Now the lens is fixed, so you can't change out lenses. As with a lot of rangefinders that are out there, the lens is stuck on there, and you're stuck with that lens, unless you're going to like some, you know, like the Leicas. Some Canon had a rangefinder that used the Leica M mount. Nikon did. They all just about all the big names kind of had some that had interchangeable lenses, but those are a little bit more expensive, harder to find. And, you know, they don't really have the charm that these Yashicas do. And if you look at the construction of it, or if you look at the design of it, it's very, I guess you could say, kind of just sterile. It's very basic. There's nothing fancy about it. There's no thrills, no frills, no nothing. Just a square metal rectangle with some leatherette on it and a lens slapped onto the front of it. That's about it. Now, these are aperture priority. So that means that you set your aperture on it, as you can see right here. You set your aperture, and the exposure meter sets your shutter speed. You know, a lot of people sit there and like, oh, you gotta have full manual, gotta have full manual. And yeah, you know, a lot of times you do. But to be honest with you, when you're trying to take quick, fast snapshots, aperture priority is perfect. I prefer aperture priority, like even with my digital camera and stuff like that. If I'm out walking down Minneapolis, or I'm out walking on you know, some other city street or something like that, I set it to aperture priority. I set my aperture to what I want, and I just go. And it's just simple, just point and click, point and click, point and click. I know my aperture is right where it's supposed to be, and I trust that the exposure meter is going to set the correct shutter speed to get the look that I want. Now, there are times where, okay, I want some motion blur, or I don't want motion blur, or something like that. Well, then, you know, you got to play around a little bit with it and figure out your camera, because, you know, every little camera has its own personality, its own quirks, stuff like that. For ranging on this, and this is another term for these type of cameras, it's called a rangefinder. There's a split image inside your viewfinder. And it's kind of similar to like an SLR, where you have an image on the top and you have an image on the bottom. It's a split prism, and you bring them together, and once they're together, you know you're in focus. Well, this is kind of similar, and it actually has two images, and when you focus, the little image in the center will line up or not be aligned based on how you're focusing. And when it lines up, that's when you know that you're in focus, and you press the shutter and you move on. Now, these also show you, right on the lens itself, it actually shows you the range that you can have for the aperture and for your focal length. So, or I should say your focus. So if I'm sitting at f/16, like I am right here, and I have, let's say, 2 meters set, it's actually going to show me that at f/16, I actually have about from 4 meters to about 1.3 meters that will be in focus. So I'll have that range, or that zone, that will be completely in focus. Anything before that and after that is actually going to be out of focus. So you can kind of judge like a distance and preset this, and then once something comes in, or a subject or whatever comes into that range, click and you're done. And you have some leadway if you're running at f/16, and the smaller you go, like for instance to f/2.8, you're pretty much at whatever focus distance you're set at. So that makes it easy. Now, for exposure metering, this is actually a very, very simple procedure with this. Very rudimentary. On the top, you'll notice there's these two little dots here. This one's orange, this one's supposed to be red, but I ended up losing the little piece of plastic when I pulled this apart to do a whole cleaning on it. So when you are, let's say you are underexposed, it's gonna show up as slow. And it's gonna have an arrow inside your viewfinder telling you which way to turn your aperture ring. So it's gonna point to your left. So you would turn your aperture ring to the left. That means you're opening up your aperture more to allow more light in, so that it gets exposed properly. And vice versa, if you're overexposed. It has a red light, tells you to move it that way to not allow as much light into the lens. Now, the shutter system on these is a leaf shutter, which is good, which means because you got a hot shoe up here that you can sync your flash pretty much at any speed. You're not limited to like a shutter speed of 30, like on a lot of cameras. And then that's really kind of it. I mean, there's not much more to this. It's very, very rudimentary, very, very simple. I mean, this is your film rewind, this is your film advance, this is your shutter release, and that is your lock for your shutter. And then you have this little switch here. If you're using flash, you can switch it over to flash and run it that way. On the bottom of your lens here, you have where you make your adjustments for your ISO, for your lens, or for your film. And then on the bottom, you have the battery compartment. Now, because we don't have mercury batteries anymore, I had to run 4 LR44s, which are 1.5 volts each, so that's putting us at 6 volts total. With the mercury batteries, they were at like 5.4 or something like that, 5.6, somewhere around there. They weren't a full 6 volts. So what I end up doing in order to get my exposure correct is I actually set my ISO a little bit lower. So if I'm running like a 400 ISO, I go about a half stop lower. So I'm at about, what is that, 300? About 300 ISO, so it's about a half a stop lower on my ISO selection here, and that allows for it to, it seems to work perfectly with this camera. Now other cameras you go full stop, it just depends on the camera and how it works. All right, so I'm gonna take this around and I'm gonna take a bunch of photos with it. Actually, I already did the photos with it. I've made multiple videos for this intro and they just weren't working out for me the way I wanted it to. Yeah, so I am going to show you that footage now. Okay, so I gotta start off by saying that, yes, I took a photograph of a porta-john. Yep, I did. So that happened. But anyway, I just have to say that Lomo 400 is absolutely a phenomenal film stock. If you get a chance, pick some up and use it. It's fantastic. It's my favorite film stock. I love the rich brown tones, the just really like emerald greens, just everything about it. It looks fantastic. The grain is great. It's just a wonderful looking film stock. All right, let's push that aside and talk about the Yashica, because that's, well, what we're here for. If you are in the market for a rangefinder, or you're just kind of up in the air about a Yashica, well, I'm gonna say go for it. Most all of these Yashica rangefinders have really good lenses on it, and they work really, really well. They are generally a little bit more simple, and that's fine. They're kind of a little bit like a thin brick, but they're built well, they work well, and you won't be disappointed, especially for how cheap these things are. Now, keep in mind that you do have to do a few things to most of these when you get them. Sometimes you can find them in pristine, perfect shape. That's great. But you gotta remember, these cameras are from like the 60s and 70s. So just like with any film camera you get from this era, you have to replace light seals. That's a given. But the rangefinder itself sometimes can be a little bit out of adjustment, and that can mess up your focus. So you want to sit there and you want to range it in. And there's several self-help type videos out there with people showing you how to do just that. So I'd recommend, if you're going to pick one up, or any rangefinder for that matter, is to make sure you watch one of those videos and figure out exactly how to adjust the rangefinder. Now the rangefinders, they're designed to be adjusted because they do lose calibration. That's just the nature of a rangefinder. So, like I said, go check out those videos if you're looking at picking one up and figure out how to do that. Anyway, thank you for watching, and hit that like button, hit that subscribe, ring that bell, and I'll see you in the next video.